Welcome back. So, Wolfie and I are here today to read some more Avril Crump and her amazing clones. This will be part 3. And before I forget, Avril Crump is published by Orchard Books, which is an imprint of Scholastic. I have their permission to post these videos until the end of school. All right. So, when we left off, we got to know Avril a little bit more. We learned about her kind of sad childhood. She's sort of funny looking, and people were not very nice to her about it, which is sad. But then she got that chemistry set from Aunt Primula, who's a very strange person, but that's for another discussion. And she loves that chemistry set in science, and it just sort of becomes her passion. So now she's at Leviticus Laboratory, and by the end, when we left off, she had about had it with Dr. Weatherby and his insults, and she was going off to her secret hideaway where she was going to write a resignation letter to quit her job. We also, if you remember, learned a little bit more about Dr. Seducta. Do you remember she was sort of spying, and she was talking to somebody in her cell phone, looking for a maverick. A maverick is someone who kind of like breaks the rules and experiments in new things. And Dr. Seducta thinks Avril might be a maverick for this person, whoever it is that she was talking to. Also, she's always calling her April. And the other thing we learned about Avril is that all of her science that she's doing is about good environmental causes, which is kind of cool, right? She wants to invent a giant sponge that could absorb the oil in oil spills. And then she also is looking for alternative sources of energy. So it's just something else to love about Avril. All right. So this chapter is called Avril's Secret Hideaway. Lab 1 was not, as you might expect, the largest and most important of the laboratories. It was a tiny, shabby room at the top of 12 winding flights of stairs, more like a broom closet than a scientific laboratory. There was not enough room to swing a cat in Lab 1, though Auntie Primula would probably have given it her best shot, but it was a perfect hideaway for Avril when Leviticus got to be too much to bear. Licking her fingers clean of baked beans, Avril reached the top of the stairs. She slotted the key, borrowed from the caretaker, into the lock of Lab 1's cobwebbed door, pushed the door open, and moved into the dim little room. She made sure to lock the door behind her. There was no light bulb, and the afternoon light was already fading outside the cracked single window, so Avril had to squint through the gathering gloom. There was the armchair she had dragged up here. There was the old padlocked steel chest that Avril used as a coffee table, already messy with crumbs and wrappers from her frequent snack attacks. She had never bothered to try to find out what was in the chest. This was Leviticus, after all. It was almost certainly filled with old paperwork, like the stuff that lay crumpled in the lab's corners. Lab 1 was not exactly a palace, but she didn't care. To Avril, it was luxury itself. A pleasurable little thrill ran through her as she eased herself into the chair and put her feet up on the chest. Avril reached for her snack box, which she had carefully wrapped in an old lab coat and hidden behind the armchair. She unwrapped it, slid open the wooden lid, and selected a large chocolate cupcake, moist and sticky with fudgy icing. There were a few sprinkles and a bluish powder decorating the icing, which Avril took to be tiny nonpareils until she bit into the cake and nearly choked. The blue sprinkles were not nonpareils at all. Heaven only knew exactly what they were, but Avril supposed that that was one of the hazards of making a snack box out of Uncle Edgar's chemistry set. She hadn't used the old set for years now, but she had not had the heart to throw away the memories of her childhood experiments. One half of the box was still filled with tubes and vials of untouched weird and wonderful chemicals, while the other was stuffed with the cakes and sweets that made Avril feel a little happier on days like these. Avril brushed off the blue powder and gave the cupcake a second try. She was just pondering a huge fruit tart when she remembered the resignation letter. She reached out to pick up an old sheet of paper from the nearest corner, turned it over to the unused side, and fished a pen out of her pocket. Dear Dr. Weatherby, Avril was so pleased with the opening of her resignation letter that she allowed herself a celebratory bite of tart. After much thought and careful consideration, too pompous, Dr. Weatherby might think she was imitating him. She scribbled it out and tried again. I very much regret that I must inform you. Too apologetic, she scribbled some more. I find myself unable to continue under such conditions. It has come to my attention that my position is no longer tenable. It saddens me from the bottom of my heart that our working relationship... Avril was almost waist deep in paper when she finally came up with the finished letter nearly half an hour later. Dear Dr. Weatherby, I've had enough. You can stuff it. Avril. She was just checking it for mistakes and agonizing over whether to put a kiss after her signature at the bottom when she heard footsteps outside. Her first instinct was to stuff the letter into her lab coat pocket, then grab Uncle Edgar's snack box and clutch it protectively to her as she waited for the footsteps to turn around and go away. But the footsteps were not going to go away. They belonged to Dr. Weatherby, who now stood outside Lab 1 with an ear pressed to the door. He had followed the trail of pale orange footprints, decorated with the occasional squashed baked bean, which led all the way from the ground floor. Dr. Weatherby hated a mess. The Crump woman disgusted him, but she was going to be useful to him now. She had humiliated him in front of Dr. Sedukta, and he was going to make her pay. Dr. Weatherby was ambitious. There was a vacant place on Leviticus' board of directors, and this fact obsessed his every waking moment. He wanted that job more than anything, and if he wanted to rise to the lofty heights of director, he had to find a way to get noticed by the powers that be. This was where Dr. Crump would come in. She was already unpopular enough with the Leviticus chiefs after those explosions. It would not take much to convince them that he had caught her in conducting an unauthorized experiment as well. He rubbed his hands at the thought of the board's gratitude and pounded on the door with his briefcase. Dr. Crump, open this door immediately. Inside Lab 1, Avril clutched her snack box even tighter. How on earth had he found her? Really, Dr. Crump, there's no point in hiding. I know you're in there. Just a minute, Dr. Weatherby. Avril's heart was pounding. For all the gung-ho spirit of her resignation letter, she was easily intimidated by her boss. She did not want to have to face him right now. Dr. Crump, unless you let me in this minute, I will be going straight to the board of directors. They don't look kindly on unauthorized experiments. Avril knew better than to argue with him. All right, she sighed, feeling defeated and turning the key in the lock. Dr. Weatherby pushed Avril out of the way and scanned the old laboratory for evidence of illegal-looking experiments. But there was nothing of interest in here, just a small armchair and some sort of low coffee table. I'm not doing anything wrong, Dr. Weatherby, Avril began. I just came up here to get some peace and quiet. But Dr. Weatherby was not listening. He had just noticed that the coffee table was not a table at all. It was, in fact, some sort of steel chest, bolted with an enormous padlock. Extremely suspicious. Could it be a real, unauthorized experiment? This was much better than that baked beans. He could hardly believe his luck. What's in this box? Dr. Weatherby straightened up and stared at Avril. I have no idea. Avril was just relieved that it was not a sample resignation letter he had spotted. It's locked, and I certainly don't have a key. Ha! A likely story. Dr. Weatherby was already sweeping snack debris off the top of the chest. He pulled at the padlock and was amazed when it came off in his hand. The metal of the lock was old and rusty, and the chest itself was tarnished and thick with dust. It looked as if it might have been there for many years. "Open it," Avril said. She was rather intrigued now and wishing she had examined it earlier. "See what's inside." "Very clever, Avril." Dr. Weatherby looked at her beadily. "Pretending you don't know what's in here. Well, it won't work with me, or the board." He turned back to the steel box and ran a hand along its dusty lid. There were some words stenciled on the steel. He cleaned more dust away, wrinkling his nose in distaste and wiping his hand clean on his lab coat. REPL CHMB MK1. 1? "I don't know what that means," Avril said, before Dr. Weatherby could even ask. She had crouched down beside him to look more closely at the box. "You'd better open it." "You open it." Dr. Weatherby did not like to take unnecessary risks, and now that there was no Dr. Seductive to impress, his looks were too important to have them ruined by some sort of explosion. Avril's looks were not of the least importance to her. Besides, she was eager to find out what a ripple might be. There was a satisfying clunk as she lifted the lid a couple of centimeters. Dr. Weatherby cringed behind her, waiting for the bang. When none came, he peered around and followed Avril's gaze into the box. It was empty. Empty, except for a handful of chemical beakers in one corner. There were also a few broken-looking switches and a couple of disconnected wires, but nothing more. Avril picked up one of the beakers and studied it more closely. It was filled with a layer of clear gel, but nothing else was visible to the naked eye. "You don't suppose..." Avril stopped. She lowered the lid a little and stared down at the lettering, and then back at the beaker in her hand as a connection between the two began to dawn on her. "All I am interested in hearing from you, Avril, is a confession." "Replachim," Avril murmured to herself. "I wonder..." Dr. Weatherby was rapidly losing what was left of his patience. "Just tell me precisely what you are doing with this chest." "But it isn't mine. I was just thinking, wasn't Professor Blute's human cloning equipment called a replication chamber?" "Professor Blute?" Dr. Weatherby blinked. "What on earth does this have to do with him?" "Look," Avril said eagerly, thrusting a beaker under Dr. Weatherby's large nose. "First of all, do you see that gel? There could be human cells suspended in there, and if replication stands for anything, it might easily be replication chamber. It looks about 15 years old, too," she mused. "What with all the dust on it?" Dr. Weatherby's mouth fell open. "It's even worse than I thought. You're using Professor Blute's old equipment in an attempt to make an illegal human clone." "I said nothing of the sort, and anyway, I'm sure the machine doesn't even work after all these years." Avril gave the chest a little kick. Deep down inside the box, a chilly blue light suddenly glowed. It flickered off again, then back on. Avril and Dr. Weatherby stared. "How did that..." A low hum started up. The chamber was vibrating gently. "I've had enough of this." Dr. Weatherby seized Avril by the elbow. "You're coming with me. I'd like to see you deny this to the board of directors. Human cloning. You're breaking Rule 149, Rule 837, Directive 17 of the 1991 statutes. You're in really big trouble now, missy." "Let go," Avril struggled, still holding her snack box tightly. "This has nothing to do with me." But Dr. Weatherby was not listening. He could already hear the president's words. "A warm welcome to our latest member, Dr. Raymond Weatherby." He was feeling intoxicated at the thought. "Come on, you hairless lump." He pulled even harder at her arm. Avril pulled back. Dr. Weatherby pulled again. And as the pair of them struggled, Avril's snack box, Uncle Edgar's chemistry set, slipped out of her grasp and flew into the air. It performed a beautiful little backflip, losing its polished wooden lid and showering its contents everywhere. Orange powder sprayed like fireworks. Chocolate cupcakes and cheese Danish rained from the sky. Strange yellow liquid splashed from uncorked tubes. Peculiar purple pellets twirled through the air, and the entire box, sweets and all, landed smack in the open replication chamber. There was a colossal, flame-throwing, window-shattering explosion. And that's where we'll stop tonight. So I will see you next time. We'll find out what that explosion was all about. Have a good night.